Today we're joining the Phyrexians in our goal of spreading Phyrexia throughout the multiverse, and this deck should positively make you purr. That last little bit should have gave you a hint of who's going to be running this deck. The Oathbreaker is going to be Ajani Sleeper Agent for a colorless, a green, a hybrid Phyrexian green-white, and a white. You get a 4-starting loyalty Planeswalker Ajani with completed, which means if you use the Phyrexian mana cost, it comes in with 2 less loyalty. If you pay with mana, it comes in at the full 4. +1, you get to reveal the top card of your library. If it's a creature or a planeswalker, you put it into your hand. Otherwise, you can put it on the bottom of your library. -3, put 3 +1/+1 counters among up to 3 target creatures. They gain vigilance until end of turn. And -6, and this is the one we want the most, you get an emblem with whenever you cast a creature or a planeswalker, target opponent gets 2 poison counters. The goal of this deck is straight up to get to that -6, launch it, and then start poisoning our opponents out as quickly as possible. So the signature spell that goes with this is Thirsting Roots. Thirsting Roots is a sorcery for 1 green that says choose 1. Search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, and put it into your hand, or proliferate. And that is the main one that we want, is that proliferate. Since we can't cast this until Ajani's out anyways, the idea here is to +1 Ajani, and then be able to Thirsting Roots him on the next turn, get him to the 6 immediately, and then -6 as that second activation of the Ajani. Because once that's up and running, then you can just start spamming creatures and just dropping them on the board. And this deck includes 20 creatures. Almost every single one of them is either infect, toxic, or some way to further that plan. So let's take a look at the creature base here, because that's the important part. We have things like Bloated Contaminator. It's a trampling 4/4 with Toxic 1. And if it deals damage, it proliferates. So all of the pieces here actually further our goal of poisoning our opponents out of the game. Branch Blightstalker, 3/1 with Toxic 2. When it hits, you're going to get 2 poison counters on them. Canker Bloom, you're going to go ahead and have the ability to either destroy an artifact, an enchantment, or proliferate. Again, that furthers our plan of pushing either Ajani up to the point where he can actually activate his ultimate, or we can just keep cranking up our poison counters. We have Crawling Chorus, just a cheap little toxic creature that creates a toxic creature when it dies. Duelist of the Deep Faith, Toxic 1 has first strike on your turn. There's just all kinds of applications for these lower to the ground toxic creatures. We have Evolution Sage. When a land enters the battlefield, you get to proliferate off of it. Again, moves up the counters on Ajani, and it moves up our poison counters. Flensing Raptor makes our toxic creatures fly for a turn, so if you really need to push a toxic creature across the plate, this helps us do that, and it has toxic and flying itself. Glistener Elf, one of our first infect creatures, just a real basic 1/1 for 1. It gives us an early threat on the board to put poison on our opponents. It also makes for a good target for Ajani's -3 ability, because then you can just dump counters onto the elf, making it much more dangerous to let go through for our opponents. We also have Grateful Apparition, 1/1 for 2, flying. When it hits, proliferate. I mean, it's just a straight up thing that we do with the deck. Watley's Raptor, when it enters, proliferate. This is also another thing to keep pushing us ahead. Jawbone Duelist, 1/1 toxic double striker. This is another one of those creatures which is actually pretty good to put the counters on if you need to do that, because it makes it harder to kill in combat, and it hits harder as well. And don't forget that the duelist does do 2 toxic hits per hit if it goes through. We have Lost Leonin as another one of our infect creatures. Again, good target for the counters, makes it hard to let it go through, and it just hits really hard once you get it up there. Mirror Convert, toxic, pay 2 life, add 1 mana. It's a good mana fixer for us. It's a good way to put poison counters when its mana usefulness is over with. It's just an all-around good and balanced card for the deck. We also have its older brother, Plague Mirror. For 2 colorless, you get a 1/1 infector with tap, add a colorless. Again, put the counters on it, makes it a good threat, fixes our mana in the meanwhile, and if they leave themselves open to attack, you just poke them for 1 and put a poison counter on them. Plague Nurse is in here for 3 and a green. You get a 3/4 toxic 2, and it also has an activated ability of pay 2 and a green. Each other creature with Toxic gains Toxic 1 and activate only once each turn. This ability actually stacks, so even if a creature already has Toxic 1, it'll gain an additional instance of Toxic 1, making it so you're putting 2 counters on there. If it has Toxic 2, it has Toxic 2 and Toxic 1, putting 3 counters. You get the idea. We have Purrrrrfect in here. 3 green, 5/3 trample haste infect. At the beginning of end step, sacrifice it. Again, this is just a quick way to do a burst of poison counters on someone. It's also, again, a good way to use those counters. You just dump counters, and all of a sudden you have an 8/6 trampler that, even if it doesn't make contact with your opponent, you're going to tear down a monster-sized creature with them trying to prevent that, or tear down multiple creatures trying to prevent the infect damage. Speaking of ways of actually making contact here, we have Skrelv Defector Might. For a white, you get a 1/1 Phyrexian Might with Toxic 1, can't block, and it has an activated ability of a Phyrexian White and tap. Choose a color. Another target creature you control gains Toxic 1 and Hexproof from that color until end of turn, and it cannot be blocked by creatures of that color. The cool part here is if you do this to an Infect creature, not only does it have Infect, it gives it Toxic 1 on top of that. So whatever Infect damage is going to put that many poison, and they're going to get an additional 1 poison off of the Toxic ability of Skrelv. We also have Slaughter Singer. It's a 2/2 for 2 with Toxic 2, and it gives our Toxic creatures +1/+1 on attack. I'm not that worried about the buffing part of this. It just makes them harder to kill in combat. I'm more interested in the fact that it was a cheap Toxic 2 creature to throw into the deck. We have Toski, Bearer of Secrets. Since we're using so many creatures in the deck, I wanted a way to draw cards, and this is just a cool way to get it. And our opponents are going to be like, crap, if I block, I'm going to lose my stuff in combat, but if I don't block, not only am I getting poison, I'm also letting them draw cards. And then we also have Venerated Rot Priest as our last creature in the deck. For a green, it's a 1/2 with Toxic 1 Phyrexian Druid, and whenever a creature you control becomes a target of a spell, they get a poison counter. We don't have a lot of like internal pumping in this deck or internal targeting stuff in here. There's a couple protection spells and that kind of stuff. But instead, what we're doing is we're just basically daring our opponents to start trying to remove our creatures. Once this hits the board, they're not going to be able to remove them without poisoning themselves. As for the rest of the deck, we have a basic base. We have Arcane Signet, Felwar Stone, Grafted Exoskeleton, and Staff of Completion as our artifacts. Mana Rocks to help fix our stuff with that at a good cheap rate. I have Staff of Completion in here, which doubles up as a mana rock, but it also proliferates for us for Ajani, for the poison. In a pinch, it can draw us a card. If there's something that's really, damaging us in some certain way, like maybe somebody put something on there that's damaging you, you can even use it to destroy the permanent that's causing you the damage. There's a lot of ways that can help us use this card. And the last artifact is Grafted Exoskeleton. For 4 colorless, you get an equipment that gives +2/+2 and gives the creature Infect as well. And the best thing I can say to strap this onto is probably either the Bloated Contaminator or the Flensing Raptor, because then you can actually hit them for 4 to 6 infect damage plus the toxic that's already attached to it. So like if a Bloated Contaminator makes contact, they're going to get infect damage, and they're going to get a proliferated poison counter, and they're going to get the toxic poison counter. So it's just going to really ramp up to 9 if that thing makes contact. And then we have some enchantments. We have Skrelv's Hive, 1 and a white. At the beginning of your upkeep, you lose a life and create a 1/1 Might token with Toxic 1. And if they have 3 or more poison counters, all of your creatures with Toxic then have lifelink, so it can actually buff your life back up. We also have Tokasia's Welcome, 2 and a white. Whenever 1 or more creatures with mana value 3 or less enter the battlefield under your control, draw a card. But it only triggers once a turn. But most of the creatures in this deck, barring like 2 or 3, have a CMC of 3 or less. This is a very low to the ground deck, which is the way I wanted it to be built. I wanted it to be fast, fast, fast. So this way, we're guaranteed to get extra cards off of this when we cast our creatures. Skrelv's Hive will actually trigger it as well when the creature token comes into play. There's just a lot of flexibility with this card. Then we have some instants here, which are going to help us either blow stuff up and get them out of our way. We're going to add poison counters. We're going to proliferate. We're going to protect our stuff. There's just various ways we can do things with this stuff. We have Fateful Absence, destroy a creature or a planeswalker, gets it out of our way. So it's also nice because then it can blow up an opposing Oathbreaker because of the planeswalker clause. We have Heroic Intervention. one in a green instant permanents you control gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. Sometimes they need to just blow up the board to keep themselves from getting poisoned out, and this will prevent that, and then they're just going to die to the poison overrun. We have Infectious Bite in here. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. Each opponent gets a poison counter. So you can use this to just target one of your guys, hit them, and then just keep on trucking through. The cool part here is if you use an infect creature, that damage that's dealt, even if it doesn't kill the creature, the infect will actually hit it and deal the damage, because it's the creature dealing the damage, and infect says whenever this creature deals damage, it gets dealt in -1 counter. So you can shrink a bigger creature down if you can't kill it in combat with this, and then swing into it, and then they're left with the choice of, oh crap, now I gotta block with this and it's gonna die, when originally it probably wouldn't have. We have Swords to Plowshares. Sometimes you just need to exile something and get it out of your way. And since our plan is to poison our opponents out, we really don't care what their life total is. So you could exile, this giant, 8/8, 10/10 creature. Who cares? I don't care what your life total is when poison's going to kill you. We also have Tamiyo's Safekeeping. Target permanent you control gains hexproof and indestructible end of turn, and you gain 2 life. Now, normally, I like using things that protect creatures, but since our commander in this case an Oathbreaker, is a planeswalker, I like this better because then we can also protect Ajani from an Alpha Strike swing, or someone just trying to poke him to keep him below the ultimate stage. We can just be like, no, you're not damaging him, and he's going to go off. And then we also have Teferi's Protection for 2 and a white instant. Until your next turn, life total can't change. You gain protection from everything, and all your stuff phases out, and you exile the spell from the game. It's just a great card, especially since we're also trying to protect Ajani here and try to keep him up, because not only does the ability here to go -6 put an emblem out, you can actually do the emblem multiple times. You can stack that emblem up, so even if you ult him, he goes back to the Oathbreaking zone, and then you do it again, you can go ahead and recast him. You'll put 2 poison on them because you've already ulted him once and he's a planeswalker. And then you turn around and start building him back up. And then if you -6 him again, you'll have 2 of those emblems up. And then you can start putting 4 poison counters for every creature and every planeswalker you cast from there on out. Because there's no way to interact with those emblems. They're there for the rest of the game. And the last of our spells is going to be 3 sorceries. We have Unnatural Restoration. Our stuff's going to die. People are going to blow stuff up. You need to get them back from the graveyards. This lets us get a permanent from our graveyard back to our hand, and it lets us proliferate. Again, pushing our proliferation plan ahead, causing us to get our stuff back on the board. So sometimes if you have this in hand, you could even let Ajani go to the graveyard when you ult him off, and then just bring him back to your hand and replay him for the 4 instead of having to pay 6 to bring him back out. We also have a couple of board wipes here, because sometimes we just really need to reset the board and keep things going. We have Vanquish the Horde, because if the board gets overrun, we just need to reset the board, blows up everything. And then we also have White Sun's Twilight. This is kind of like the on-theme board wipe for X white sorcery. You gain X life, you create X colorless Phyrexian Might tokens with Toxic 1. If the X is 5 or more, destroy all other creatures. So this kind of is a back-breaking, almost one-sided board wipe, because what you end up doing is you blow the board up, you get a bunch of Phyrexian Mites, and they may already have a few poison counters on them, and if they don't board wipe you back, basically, or come up with a way to restock their blockers immediately, they're gonna get run over by the Mites and die to the poison damage. So what did you guys think? I had a lot of fun putting this deck together. It took a lot of hard cuts to get there, because this was actually reverse engineered. I originally, when I did the Liliana Oathbreaker deck, I built the Oathbreaker deck, and then I built the Historic Brawl version of the deck. Well, this one was actually backwards. I built a Historic Brawl version of the deck, and then I turned it into an Oathbreaker deck because I wanted to see if I could do the process in the other direction. So it took a lot of thought, a lot of careful planning, trying to figure out what I wanted to use for the signature spell, what I wanted to use for the rest of the deck, and just it turned into a real fun little project for me, and I hope you enjoy it. Later this week, you're actually going to get to see that Historic Brawl deck in action, and it's going to be a lot of fun. I hope you get to watch it, and I'll see you in the next video.